Where I live is Market Raisin, located roughly halfway on the railway line between Barnetby and Lincoln. When I was studying at the University of Lincoln, it was taking the train from here to Lincoln almost every day that basically turned me into a train fan. But there's definitely a lot to improve in the future. The frequency here is quite low at about 2 hours outside peak times. There's definitely a lot of travel here that is simply not being taken because of these train schedules. But having looked at the line quite a bit, looking at the land around it and where it goes, I get the feeling, given the proper upgrades, this could turn into a really fantastic line to serve Lincolnshire and Lincoln in particular. In this video, I'm going to look at the stations on this line, both present and possibly future, as we come to imagine what this line could be. My proposal is that this line could perhaps serve a London Overground commuter service with trains every half hour and stops in the right places. To show how I think that's going to be possible, let's look at the station on the furthest end of that line, all the way down in Newark. This line essentially ends at Newark Northgate, the station with a connection to the East Coast Main Line. Services on this Overground service can start there. I think in order to accommodate it, I will build a platform 4 with the potential to expand into a second station entrance on the east side of the building. If we zoom out a bit, you can definitely see how there's a demand for people being able to get to the station there, as well as possible future transit-oriented development that could be induced if the service on this line is made more frequent. Heading towards Lincoln now, our next station on the line is at Collingham. I think Collingham, as is right now, is good for the service that this line would need. No issues there. The next station is Swinderby. This is a really rural station without much going around it, and I think switching the services there from the current service to this new commuter one is probably a better use of the amount of demand that station gets, rather than forcing some intercity services but not all to stop there, as it does now. Next on the line is the first abandoned station on the route, Thorpe on the Hill. At a glance, this is another rural station that seemingly doesn't have much going for it, but zooming out, it's right next to a nature reserve. My experience with transit in Zurich with the S21 line is that these kinds of transit to nature connections can often be very undervalued. I think a train stop here with a proper connection to the nature reserve next door could really bring riders to the station. The next station up, Highcombe. This is an existing station, and although it's grown in recent years, I'm not a fan of the kind of development around it right now. But here's what it is, and it is a useful linchpin to what comes next, which is, I propose, a new station at Swanholme Lake. This has much better residential density around it, it gets people to workplaces, and is a good fit for a new station that starts to go into the city of Lincoln. And that's especially the case when we compare it to the next plausible station location on the line, Boltham Moor. Zooming out, you can really get a sense of how this is both a residential stop as well as another stop to nature thanks to the parks next to it. This is the kind of station location we need if we want to get people off of the congested Tritton Road and onto the rails every time they want to go to the centre of Lincoln. Next up, New Boltham. I've already made a video about how underused the land around the station here is, and with a stop here, that could really spur development and better land use here. Something I didn't mention there is the proposal for the Western Grove Corridor, which, next to my proposed station location, includes a business park and a stadium. If you can imagine a station here surrounded in the future by a sports stadium and high-density mixed-use locations on the other side of the track, you can imagine how much ridership this would demonstrate. And next we go into the city's main station itself, Lincoln. I've been thinking a lot about how the land around Lincoln could be better served in the future. And I think a southern entrance is absolutely needed. And in order to accommodate both the increase in commute traffic that this Overground proposal would bring, I think it's worth going over improvements to the station as well. So here's my take on it. First, if you land on platforms 4 or 5, you need to go over the bridge and exit on the north side of the station. Then, as you can see here, it's a decent walk all the way to the footbridge. At there, it's quite an old, narrow bridge to get across, where you're just deposited into what is now a car park. Here is my proposal on improving that. First, a new, wider bridge going across the station more directly is introduced. This bridge is free to use for all passengers, with small areas that connect to the existing within the station bridge, protected by ticket barriers for much more direct access to the platform you need. Second, a new station entrance is introduced for what will be a restored platform 6. The reason I am proposing this platform 6 be reopened is that I think this is where currently the Lincoln to Sheffield services should now terminate. This has the benefit of freeing up platforms 4 and 5 for more through services, while also giving the London to Lincoln interseas with their much longer dwell time more freedom to wait at the station while still allowing overground services to quickly come through. And third, the whole car park in front of the station right now is turned into a recreational outdoor space. Really, this could be any kind of transit-oriented development that you would like, but my preference is for some kind of recreational outdoor and event space. This is actually currently where they're holding the Lincoln Pride events, and I think turning this into a more permanent space for that kind of stuff would be a great benefit for the city. As part of this, I would also demolish this building on the High Street in order to open up a new access point from the High Street to this new park. In order to make up for the demolishing of these shops, I'd probably build a kind of arcade with stores that face the people as they go in and out of the park, just to induce that kind of foot traffic through there. One thing I discovered is that this route would essentially be restoring a road that already existed once upon a time. That's just a neat fun fact about the history of this place. Overall, this is just one vision of what could happen to Lincoln Station in the future, but I hope it gets your imagination running in demonstrating how the capacity and space around the station could be improved by simply remixing what already exists rather than reinventing the wheel. Next along the line is Monk's Abbey, which leads out into an incredibly unique recreational park within the city. This is already a relatively dense old residential area that could do with a station, but also the area south of the station is just ripe for transit-oriented development potential on these brownfield sites. And the station could very well spur that kind of redevelopment. The next two stations I am thinking of are in the small suburb towns of Cherry Willingham and Reepham. I'm bundling these two together because of their close proximity, And also to demonstrate the power that just having a small stop within these kinds of towns could bring great benefits to them. An understandable controversy that often arises in these kinds of communities is the problem of building new homes there and how that would lead to sprawl that intrudes on nature. I think when it comes to the opportunity to build stations in these places, it is important to note of the power that transit has to help densify and control sprawl and development. Stations in these towns would be fantastic, but I think the real draw for residents would, in the end, just be the ability to prevent headlines like these. And that is a great benefit too. My next choice of a station is maybe a slightly more controversial one, and that would be to reopen Langworth. And I propose that this station would be a park and ride. I am aware that the topic of park and rides are somewhat controversial in the transit space for understandable reasons. Car parks and car drivers aren't nearly as reliable of a constituency for transit ridership than just dense housing and job centres around stations. But I think at this specific site, the inclusion of a park and ride is justified. Here, this station would provide a valuable connection for various towns all over Lincolnshire, from Skegness to Horncastle and Louth, all of whom this line would be a valuable connection for people going into Lincoln, Newark, or even just onto the East Coast Main Line beyond. That, I hope, demonstrates the value that this station could bring, even if it doesn't mean that way at first. The next station on the list, of course, would be Market Raisin itself. This is already a beautiful station that's long enough for free car trains, and not much would need to be done to the platforms themselves to accommodate this new service. I would like to speak a moment, however, on the opportunity for an eastern entrance to the station. As of right now, there's only one way into the station, and that is from the northwest side, despite the fact that plenty of people live that way on the station. As of right now, that direction is built up by a supermarket, and in the future, that area just screams transit-oriented development potential. I would love to do what they do in the Netherlands, where they take the Albert Heijn whatever supermarket and just bury it underground and build small businesses and housing above it. I think that would be a much better use of the space here without getting rid of the supermarket entirely, as well as just providing a great constituency for this station as well. And finally, this line will go all the way to Barnetby, where it would then terminate at a new station at Humberside Airport. I've already made a video about this topic, and I would direct you to it for more detail. But in short, trains would stop at Barnetby and then go forward on a new single-track line to Humberside Airport, where it takes over the space that a car park currently is. The yard at Barnetby would also be the location of the depot for this service. To go into some of the technical ideas, I think if the London Overground could handle Class 172s for a while, then this line can do with very similar units as well. I think the main concern for infrastructure on this line is mostly improving a select few stations and getting that rolling stock rather than any needs to significantly reconfigure track layouts or perhaps signalling. I think the overall benefits of this service would be plentyfold. Better density around stations, alternatives to the congested roads that connect Newark to Lincoln and beyond, stronger community connections and better access to nature, all for what I think would be a reasonable amount of investment for what would be needed to bring all that up to standard. Lincoln is a city that absolutely can get walkability and transit improvements done. I will recall when the level crossing on the high street used to be a road with traffic on it. Pedestrians would have to crowd onto the sidewalk. The portion of the high street just south of the crossing wasn't very attractive because of the cars going through it. And how did we solve the issue of that level crossing getting too busy? We pedestrianised that area of the street. It didn't make that part of the road a paradise overnight, but things are definitely getting better, and it's a massively more pleasant to be around today than it was even just a few years ago. As someone who was at university while those improvements were being made, the gradual improvement of it during my study was absolutely noticeable and appreciated. If we can bring that kind of initiative and thinking to the railway line that runs through the city as a whole, we could really accomplish something special there. I think the last thing to mention is the existing Grimsby to Leicester service that runs along this line. I think it should be kept and definitely made hourly at least. But I also think that with the benefit of this commuter line, that could also be made to run more express. I think Barnaby, Market Raisin, Lincoln, Collingham would be all the stops that service would need to make now, allowing it to skip Swinderby and perhaps Highcombe if needed, although more consultation needed on that point. So please comment what you think down below. Thank you for watching.